This is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. And if you're an atheist, we want you to know you are not alone. You are, not your.
Sorry.
We worked on that for like an hour.
Yeah.
All
so
right.
much for our two-part harmony. Well, I'm Faithless Forrest.
And I'm no longer Catholic Dan.
And we want you to know that if you don't believe in God, I'm repeating this. It's February. So again, we're going to talk about evolution and the two distinctly different meanings the word has when used by scientists.
But first, we want to tell the viewers about the show sponsors. All right. The Atheist Society of Knoxville frequently has a fun meetup at a bar or eatery. Tonight's meetup is at Barley's in the Old City starting around 5:30 p.m. So set your DVR, tell your friends, go on out, meet up with some cool people, and then, if you're watching, you can watch this later. Look for Look for the silver-jacketed copy of God Delusion standing upright on the table. And as Matt Dillahunty at Atheist Experience says, everyone is welcome to our happy hour for food, drink, and conversation. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't.
Please don't. The Rationalists of East Tennessee have several regular monthly meetings. The first and third Sunday mornings of the month are usually lectures with lively roundtable discussions. The second Sunday we hold the Skeptics Book Club, and on the fourth Sunday we're mixing it up sometimes with a get-together we call a Reflections meeting, which features a potluck in someone's home. Sometimes we get together and play board games or watch movies, and now and then we have a blood drive.
Later in the show we will just... Now and then we have a blood drive.
Now and then.
Yeah, whenever we feel like it, blood drive. Later in the show, we'll give you the website's information so you can check out the times and stuff about that. So now we're going to go to our segment called In the News.
In the News. Well, we have some items on which to comment. Today is Groundhog's Day and Candlemas, which originates as a cross-quarter point. And so no longer Catholic, Dan. Candlemas is, I guess, some kind of a Catholic observation, and I guess I was wondering, is this something that was important in your childhood?
Well, first and foremost, did the groundhog see a shadow? I don't know.
All right, we do want to get the priorities straight here, the important things. So, did you see it? The whole groundhog seeing shadow thing was a kind of a problem to me in Minnesota because. In Minnesota, let's see, if he saw his shadow, we were going to have at least 6 more weeks of winter. And if he didn't see his shadow, we were going to have like 42 days more of winter. Mm-hmm. And that was at best.
So winter's coming in Minnesota, regardless of what you see, Mr. Groundhog.
Winter was staying.
Right.
Yeah, it just seemed cruel when they would say only 6 more weeks. And, so we had all of February to get through. And my birthday was on March 13th. And so that
still is probably.
That's true. I hadn't thought of it that way. But it means that my birthday is falling, like 5 weeks or so after this. And, my birthday was often marked by, nasty cold weather. And if it had gotten warm, then it turned into sloppy, wet, melty snow kind of weather, which, that was often, even worse.
Right.
So I guess I was wondering, though, what the whole point about Candlemas would be and how it might be observed.
Well, as we've talked about before, I went to a parochial school. I went to a very fundamentally Catholic grade school. I went there for kindergarten all the way to the first year of high school, and then I transferred to a public school. And so I do remember a holy day of obligation in February, and I can only assume that it was Candlemas because I do remember lighting, like there was a big ceremony about lighting this one large candle. And as an altar boy, it was like, okay, this is you wanted this mass because you get to be the one to play with the fire.
Get to play with fire, all right.
And our thing was we would take our fingers and then dip it into the wax after you blow out the candle, and then you could have these wax balls.
All right.
Throw out your butt.
Okay.
But so, I don't know the significance.
Well, Candlemas falls on the cross-quarter point, and just like Halloween is followed by
All Souls Day.
All
Saints Day is November 1st. All Souls Day is November 2nd.
My goodness, 2 of them.
2 in a row.
Well, these fall on approximately the cross-quarter points, and I think they probably at one time did land on the cross-quarter points, but calendars moved around in antiquity, and
You say antiquity like everyone knows what that word means. I mean, I know, but explain it for the producer.
In the past, candles weren't as accurate. Now you've got me all befuddled. Calendars were not as accurate.
No, I know what you're saying. Calendars weren't as accurate.
I did it.
Back to me.
All righty, and so I think especially like Halloween, with its pagan origins, was a bit of a challenge to orthodoxy, and so they wanted to have the last word, so they put a holiday right after that, and that would be All Saints' Day. I'm assuming that Halloween probably landed on the cross-quarter point at one time as well, because it was only a day or so away.
So you're saying that they just put this holy day after Halloween just so it's like, hey, don't forget about us? Sort of?
They didn't want to have, they didn't want to not compete for hearts and minds. Mm-hmm. As well as there is actually, in a sense, a better alignment with the change of the seasons with the cross-quarter point. Because, by November, it's getting cold, and it really kind of makes sense to think of winter starting then, rather than starting on the 21st of December.
Right, especially for us in North America.
And here in February, the days have gotten noticeably longer now. When we get done with this show, we'll walk out, and it will not be dark. When we walked out of the shows in December, it was dark. And what's the for our distant viewers? We know that we're watched way up in Canada by one viewer at least now and then. What's our weather like today?
Very nice. It's about 65 degrees, sunny, pleasant.
Yeah, we're in T-shirts, and it's not just because it's the studio.
Right.
All right, well, we've got some birthdays here.
Right.
Why don't we jump into that?
All right, so our February famous free thinkers' birthdays, we have Thomas Paine. He was born actually January 29th and February 9th. He was also born in both 1736 and 1737. Very impressive.
Now that ties right back into the whole thing about calendars. So what was happening is that the calendar system established by Julius Caesar, which would happen at about what year?
One.
Very good.
Okay.
Something like that. That's the Julian calendar, and it may actually have been Augustus.
I was going to say 3.
It may have been Augustus Caesar who was doing that. Because I'm not actually certain of the date of the assassination of Caesar. I think he was actually assassinated B.C.
Oh, okay.
But the calendar that we use is called the Julian calendar, and it was established by Julius Caesar.
The calendar everyone uses, not just atheists.
The calendar in Western Europe.
Okay.
And notice I have to qualify it to Western Europe.
Right.
It was established by Julius Caesar, used throughout the Roman Empire, and it was an improvement over the previous system because the previous system didn't have a regular pattern of leap year days. It required like the local officials to decide whether or not you're going to have a leap year. And I guess at the time that the calendar was adopted, they had a single year with over 400 days in it in order to bring the calendar back into the seasonal alignment that it traditionally had.
Okay.
So imagine going from 365 to over 400 days. I assume they added a whole month.
I feel like you could just go the opposite way and lop off, just restart the count.
You'd have had to take off 11 then.
Yeah.
11 months.
Who cares?
Well, what happened with the Julian calendar is that it put a leap year day every 4 years. That's actually too many, and
because don't we really only have like an
centuries.
hour or something every year or something?
Well, every year we accumulate an extra, nearly quarter of a day.
Okay.
So if math don't fail me now, yeah. But what happens is every 4 centuries we've actually added 1 day too many. So the new algorithm fixed by, and it's called the Gregorian Reform because it happened while there was a Pope Gregor. They dropped 11 days in order to bring the calendar back because it was overcorrected. And then on centuries that are divisible by 400, you drop the leap year day.
We do that in centuries, so
yeah.
the hundreds.
Yeah, so the year 1900 was a leap year day, but the year 2000, I had it backwards. The year 1900 did not have a leap year day, in the year 2000 did. It's unlikely that I'm going to live long enough to see a century change with and then omitting the leap year. If you
It'd be unlikely for me
good
as well.
health and stay exercise, you may be able to do it.
I exercise, but I do a
and
lot
if you
of
make it,
healthy
just think of me and
I'll celebrate that day for you if I'm
alrighty.
109 or whatever.
yeah, have some eggnog or apple cider or something like that.
I will.
So the point about Thomas Paine is that he was born before the calendar reform, because
I gotcha.
Because Protestant nations, England being one of them, adopted the reform later because they didn't want to follow this papal innovation.
So January 29th to February 9th is an 11-day swing.
Yes, but then there's another complexity, and that is that in England they counted the beginning of the year from March 25th. Now, I think March 25th at one time had probably been the vernal equinox as well, and so that's why they were, in a sense, counting the beginning of the year from the equinox. The ancient Greeks, I think, did something like that as well. The signs of the zodiac begin with the crossing of the sun from the southern hemisphere to the northern hemisphere. That happens on the vernal equinox. But it got moved, and the result is that Thomas Paine was also then born in 2 different years. Amazing enough. Well,
He was a heck of a guy.
we mentioned this last time, but we've never fully elaborated on it, and maybe we'll give it a rest for a couple of years before bringing it back. Who else is born in February?
Well, we've got a very famous fella named Charles Darwin, born February 12th on the same day and same year as old Abe Lincoln in 1809.
1809, all righty.
So Darwin was born in 1809, same day as Lincoln.
Yep.
And they both went on to do some pretty important stuff.
Great things, yes.
We also have Majel.
I can't pronounce
Is
her
it
name.
Majel? Majel Barrett Roddenberry.
Yep.
Majel, M-A-J-E-L. February 23rd, 1932. We know her from her many Star Trek appearances. And I'm going to go ahead and put a caveat there. You may know her from many Star Trek appearances. I do not.
Well, she was in the pilot show. She was number 1. She was like the first officer, kind of the role that Spock got later. Spock was in the pilot episode, but he was called something like science officer. Then
I like that.
she's Nurse Chapel in the
So up here
original
we're
series.
looking at the woman in
Yeah,
between
she's
both of us.
right in here. Yep.
Right.
She was in The Next Generation as the mother of Deanna Troi. And as the same character, I believe she's appeared on Deep Space Nine. I have never seen any of the most recent series, the Enterprise series. I don't know if she made it into them or not. She has died, but she lived a good long life, and you can see there. This image is coming from Wikipedia, as do all of the images I think on today's show.
So
Almost all
Tommy
of them.
Paine in the middle, right?
Yep.
Thomas Paine, and then over here.
Charles Darwin
Charles
above your
Darwin.
head.
This guy
Lincoln
might
above
be
me.
This Alan something.
That's Lincoln.
And then the far guy. We're about to mention his name.
We're
It's
gonna move on, yeah.
Christopher Eccleston.
That could be how it's pronounced.
February 16th, 1964. The 9th Doctor Who.
The 9th Doctor Who. He's the last Doctor Who I've seen. I haven't seen any of the ones since then, but I thought he was
0 through
great.
9, so.
All righty.
Doctor Who is apparently a very famous show. I'm a huge fan of The Simpsons, and they reference Doctor Who all the time, and it's always over my head.
I became aware of Doctor Who in the 1970s, probably about 1979, when they were doing reruns of shows from probably the mid-70s, and the actor portraying the Doctor was Tom Baker, who had a kind of he had a nice quirky character. He was easy to like. But they went through a period where they had, let's say that their sets weren't much better than ours. You know, we got the green screen here, we put a picture up. Well, they had an awful lot of papier-mâché models that looked like papier-mâché models. And so I used to say that part of what made his show so good was that in order to stand to watch it, you had to augment the special effects with your imagination as if you were reading a book. And it turns out that the writing was very good. Douglas Adams, for instance, was writing for Doctor Who during that time frame. And so that caused me to at least be aware of it. The writing for, what is his name, Christopher
Eccleston.
Eccleston. The writing for his shows I thought were particularly good as well. But they have a much better special effects budget now. You don't have...
They've relaunched the series, right? I think they have.
It has not been in continuous run since 1963, but near continuous run. There was a period where, for a couple of years, they let it rest, and then brought it back. And
he's got a wacky robot sidekick, I think.
Well, in fact, during the Tom Baker years, there was a robot called Canine, a dog.
Okay.
And he actually became a little bit of an impediment, meaning he would solve problems by, sneaking through the air duct so many times that it became kind of a crutch.
Like, how do we get out of this one? Put the dog in the air vent.
That's how it worked out. Yeah, something like that.
So we're looking at Abe Lincoln up here. Is he really a free thinker?
Well, the evidence, I think, is clear. And there's a claim by a friend of Lincoln's that he burnt an essay that Lincoln wrote praising Thomas Paine. And there's also some other quotes, and maybe you can read some of them.
Lincoln echoes Paine when he said, "When I do good, I feel good. When I do bad, I feel bad. That's my religion."
And that echoes where Thomas Paine said something like, "The world is my country, and to do good is my religion."
I could follow those sentiments. The Bible is not my book, nor Christianity my profession. I could never give assent to the long, complicated statements of Christian dogma.
So that, if that quote is genuine, it's very explicit. He says he's not Christian. So, but Lincoln may harbor deist-like ideas, for he also wrote, "I can see how it might be possible for a man to look down upon the earth and be an atheist, but I cannot conceive how a man could look up into the heavens and say there is no God." Last week's show we talked about the deism of Thomas Paine, and Thomas Paine was setting out with Age of Reason to undermine Christian, the idea that the Christian book could be treated as some literal revelation. But yet Thomas Paine thought that there would be an afterlife. Well, he expressed it this way: he hoped for an afterlife.
Right. We all hope. It's just not happening.
Yeah, well, I also, hope to win the lottery, but I don't even go so far as to buy a ticket.
Yeah, I was going to say, I hope as well, but I don't play.
But I don't buy a ticket,
Right.
That's where I am with the same thing with Christianity. Well, I could hope that, but I'm not buying that ticket.
Yeah.
Because the cost is, frankly, too high. All right. So there's a nice eulogy to Abraham Lincoln written by Robert Ingersoll. Could you read that one for us?
Abraham Lincoln was, in my judgment, in many respects, the grandest man ever president of the United States. Upon his monument, these words should be written: "Here sleeps the only man in the history of the world who, having been clothed with almost absolute power, never abused it except upon the side of mercy."
All righty. Well,
that's a dang good quote.
I think it's nice to finish on that note for our Free Thought birthdays, at least this week. And let's move on into the main topic.
So we're going to be talking about evolution, cosmology, and biology.
Yeah.
And so we're going to compare and contrast the story told by biological evolution with the other nonsense. Right.
You meant creationism.
I meant creationism.
Yeah. Or perhaps the stories involving talking snakes that give dietary advice. So the word evolution stems from, I think, Greek, perhaps Latin, meaning something like to revolve. And it carries the connotation of something like a scroll that unrolls. And a scroll is a thing that you can write a story on, and unlike the pieces of paper here we use as our show notes, where we have to turn them, a scroll, you unroll it from one, you roll it up on the other, you never turn the page. There's a kind of a continuity to the story rather than a little break. And so the word evolution is actually well chosen to emphasize an important aspect of biological evolution that Charles Darwin was writing about and emphasizing in his book Origin of Species, and that is special creation implies something like it's been printed here and maybe it's on a separate page. You know,
I know what you're saying.
The cats
It's
are
already
printed
been
on a
written,
separate page
right?
from the dogs, and they were never on the same page.
Okay.
Meaning they all reproduce after their kind. Whereas evolution is this story of continual change. Now, there is, you know, there is a succession of individuals, much like on a written scroll, there's a succession of words, but there are no chapter breaks. The story just keeps going. We could even say it's a long run-on sentence, in fact.
Right.
Now, the word evolution is also used with respect to cosmology because we talk about how things change, and there is a history that we can infer about the universe by merely looking around us and observing how the Earth has an apparent history. We can see the history of accumulation of sediments in the rocks and their layers. And when we look out into the far universe, we see some history there. And in fact, modern science has put some amazingly, you know, precise numbers on that. About 14 billion years of stuff has happened.
I love this chart. I love this chart. I've seen this on the internet a bunch of times, and it's really it's a sort of a model of time-space continuum, sort of, right?
Yes. There's important landmarks on it. So we have about 14 billion years to cover, and this chart is sort of our overall map. Hovering over my head here is what's thought of sometimes as a beginning, but in reality what we can say is that the universe was in a hot, dense state, and the nature of that state is that it would erase details about what may have come before if there was something before. It's a little bit like saying, if I had an ice cube in my hand, it has a shape right now and we can see it. But as it sits in my hand and it heats up, it disassociates into water. And when we look at that little puddle of water, we can't tell what the shape of the ice cube was because it has gone through a hotter state. And the heating will cause it the disassociation and erase evidence of the previous
There's
state.
no memory of the cube shape that was formerly in your hand.
Not in that water that's imaginarily
There's
in
no
the
way to
palm
go
of my
back
hand.
and see how that was.
So sometimes we talk about the Big Bang as if it was a beginning. Well, certainly it's a beginning in that I could imagine that I made that ice cube one day, and prior to that it was water that came out of my faucet. And so as an ice cube, it has a beginning. But the water doesn't have a beginning, at least the beginning does not coincide with that ice cube. So
Okay.
let's look at the notes here.
Sure.
And I guess the next slide as well. Oh, actually, Sam, back up one. So there's a little landmark here. I guess my finger's on it. Right here. If the total span here over all of this is 13.7 billion years, I'm going to round it up and say 15 billion years because I can divide that by 3 in my head. So a third of this is about 5 billion years. The Earth and the Sun appear to have formed about 4.5 billion years ago. We'll round that up and say 5. So the Earth has been in existence over this span here, it's over near you, about 1/3 of the length of the entire universe.
Right.
And
then humans we showed up about
we're not even 1 pixel.
I was going
on
to say,
this scale.
like here.
But let's talk about the other extreme here.
Okay.
Projecting the expansion of the universe backwards into denser and denser regions, and then finally getting to a region where we extrapolate to zero volume, we can then talk about, all right, let's pretend we run the movie forward again. And less than 1 second after the movie starts running, we have protons and neutrons. Now,
So we're making the analogy that the Big Bang is like a movie beginning.
Yes.
Okay.
And way over here at this little glowing spot here in a region that's only 1 second long out of nearly 15 billion years, we have protons and neutrons forming. they actually form out of quarks, which are called ups and downs. And all of that happens in less than a second.
Right.
Now, the universe is still really dense at this point. All of the matter is bound in a space where the protons and neutrons collide with each other, much like they do today only in the center of stars. And what happened is the protons and neutrons collide and bind, and that formed helium nuclei. And a little bit of lithium. And in fact, within the first 3 minutes, a ratio of hydrogen to helium to lithium was established that is observed in all of the oldest stars that we observe.
So we had a bunch of random protons and neutrons, and then whatever happened, and then 3 minutes later we had these three elements?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's approximately something like 20, I think it's more than 20, but less than 25% of the atoms were helium, and then much less than 1% are lithium. The remaining, something like 75% or more, were hydrogen. And that is the composition that you find in old stars. Now, as the universe is expanding, it also cools. And as it cools, eventually the electrons that are there can bind with the protons, and they become electrically neutral, and all of the light that was actually sort of within this block, we're being, Dan, we've got a call here apparently. Why don't you push the button and greet our caller?
Hi, you're listening to Freethought Forum. You're watching Freethought Forum with your host, Faithless Forrest, and no longer Catholic Dan. Can I get a name or nickname?
Yes, Dr. Paul Simpek.
Dr. Paul Simpek. Okay. All right, Doc. You have a question for the show?
Yes, just a question. In
Sure.
light of the Iowa caucuses last night, I, as a recovering Catholic myself, I was always taken aback about how the churches always tell people who to vote for. And I was wondering if you guys had any insight on, as a devout atheist, who should we be supporting in this presidency? And my follow-up to that would be, do you think we will ever have an openly atheist president in our lifetime?
All right, well, let me address the first issue. We're part of a nonprofit organization, and we cannot endorse candidates, nor can we recommend. We would, merely say you're a citizen and you need to make informed decisions. The question about whether or not we'll have an openly atheist president is a good one. I think the first openly gay member of Congress is Barney Frank. And he was able to come out as gay while still in office. Now, he's no longer in office, and he's come out as a non-believer. So apparently between those two things, he felt that he couldn't talk about his lack of belief, that there was a stronger discouragement against him talking about his lack of belief than about his sexual orientation.
So
Interesting.
So the Iowa caucuses happened, and it's the beginning of all these caucuses that we're all it's the primaries, right?
The primaries.
The primaries. And so we can't tell you who to vote for, but if you've watched this show at all, you probably have an idea which way we would prefer.
Yeah.
But
certainly I feel as well. It's very fair game to say that in the 2008 election, during one of the Republican debates, the moderator asked the candidates if they believed in evolution. Notice the word belief. I think it really should be, do you accept evolution as scientific fact? And all of the candidates but one said that they, disbelieved evolution. They were pandering to an audience of ignorance. We can't actually know what any one of those candidates truly believe in.
Now
their
you're
heart.
talking probably about a Republican debate, or was this an open?
You wouldn't have. I think it was only asked in one debate, and
Okay.
yes, it was the Republican debate.
Okay.
But it's remarkable that these candidates would pander to what I could only call, superstitious ignorance here in the 21st century. There is no doubt evolution happened. Darwin provided an explanation of why it happens, but that's independent of the fact that it's happening. And at the time of Darwin, there had been multiple theories proposed. Darwin's own grandfather had proposed a mechanism or a theory of why it happened. But Charles Darwin in 1859 is the one who came up with the argument and evidence for the mechanism of why it happens. So did we answer your question?
Yes, you did. You did. I appreciate it.
All right. May we ask you a question or
Sure.
two? Have you watched the show before?
Yes, I have watched a few episodes. I never usually watch it live. I watch it on YouTube.
Who's cuter?
Who's cuter? Yeah, who's cuter? We were also going to ask, are you local? Because of course we want to invite you down to Barley's Tap Room and Pizzeria if you ever get the chance.
Well, thank you for the invite. I'm actually in Portland, Oregon.
Really?
I'm also happy to say there are many, many active atheists and way fewer annoying Christians.
All righty. How did you hear about us way out in Portland?
Oh, the internet. A buddy of mine said, hey, you should check this show out. There's another atheist show we watch out here. It's similar to yours, and I don't know how he found it. He said, hey, check these guys out as well.
Well,
I like the rotating cast. I will say, No Longer Catholic Dan, one of my favorites.
It's because I wear sweet T-shirts.
All right. Well, yeah, we're aware of other shows. It turns out we thought we were the first Freethought Forum, but it turns out there's one in, I think, somewhere in Pennsylvania, maybe Philadelphia, that has been using this name. And, of course, we are inspired by the atheist experience out of Austin, Texas. And, we're happy to say they are our inspiration.
We appreciate your call. I got one quick question. And
Yep.
you said you're a doctor of physics?
Philosophy.
Philosophy.
Okay. All right. Interesting. We might have to read some of your stuff.
I will also leave you with this, and I'll make it brief. I have always suspected, whether you like his policies or not, Barack Obama is actually an atheist. He's just too smart not to be.
There we go.
You guys have a great day.
All righty. Thank you so much for calling.
I was actually going to say that because he said, are we ever going to have an atheist president? And I'm like, we kind of got one now. Like, he's not out, but come on.
The president has written a book that I've read. It's called The Audacity of Hope. And in it, he explicitly says that his mother was a non-believer.
We have another call?
We have another call.
All right. We're going to go right to the phones.
Hello. Thank you for calling Freethought Forum. Please listen to your phone because the television has a 7-second delay. Can we get a name or a nickname, please?
Yes, this is Charles from Central Illinois.
Well, hello, Charles.
I just Googled leap year, and it was added on by Julius Caesar and became official in 45 BC.
45
Okay.
BC. So but Charles, they sure didn't start their calendar at a negative 45 years. So there must be this explanation of how our new starting date occurs.
That was the Gregorian calendar. One of the early Gregories decided to give a date for Christ's time, and assigned it to a monk. Okay.
Well, I think you're mixing up two things here. Well, you go on, tell it, and then I'll add my piece.
Before that, we used the reign years of emperors. Okay, starting with Augustus. Now, this monk gave it his best shot, but there were many, many years where there were multiple emperors fighting over who was the real emperor and so forth. And so it got confused, and he gave it his best shot, and he put it at what we now call Almodino 1. Okay?
All right.
Which is how we got the modern calendar.
All right.
Gregory then made it official in 1582 by adding on the leap year to every 4 years, except for a certain set of years where the
Divisible
I'm
by
not sure how it
400.
goes.
It's where centuries are divisible by 400, you drop it.
Yeah.
Well, I was
not divisible by 400. You drop it.
very good.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Now, as for the science business, two of my favorite things on why science is greater than God is one, Edmund Halley, using Isaac Newton's mathematical formula for calculus, plotted out and predicted the return of a comet. Predicted, not prophesied, which was nobody else in history had ever done that, ever.
Which comet?
All those priests, all
The
those
one that goes by
popes,
his name.
Oh, duh.
all
Yeah.
those holy men and all that, and all their visions and so forth, none of them ever did that. So the divine knowledge is a complete failure in that regard.
Yep.
Well, they predicted some stuff after the fact, and then they went back and changed their predictions, sort of. That was...
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. No, they didn't make predictions. They made prophecies.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
And the other one is in medical science. The single most fatal disease known is rabies. There are absolutely zero known survivors of rabies until Louis Pasteur came up with a treatment for it using the scientific method. All the prayers, all the holy waters, all the saints' dusts, and everything else was a complete and total failure.
What?
So,
No way.
Yeah. Rabies has 100% mortality
Sure, sure.
rate until Pasteur invented a vaccination program against it.
Okay. I was more shocked that the prayer didn't work.
Oh, sorry. You should have put up a sarcasm sign.
Sorry.
I missed it.
but the whole business about God being greater than science is an act of faith, which if you've read the Bible, you know of the hope for things to be and the desire of things that cannot be seen.
Yep.
So, and that's it. That's all they've got in that regard. Because I've yet to see of any scientific theory or principle or law being demonstrated to be false by theological reason.
Yep. They're well, and in fact, during the 17 and 1800s, what happened is that the theological claims for being able to heal people and so on, they gradually had to give that up because science was achieving what they never did. And so now we hear them mostly resorting to claiming that they've got a monopoly on morality. And of course, their monopoly on morality is just as tenuous.
Yeah, ever watch West Wing? There's a great scene in there where the guy playing the president starts asking questions about morality, like, how much could he get for his daughter, since in Deuteronomy you're allowed to sell your daughters?
Yep.
And then, do I actually have to kill my chief of staff because he likes to work on the Sabbath, or can I farm it out to the Secret Service and things of that nature?
Yeah. People wouldn't really like to live by the rules in the Bible, both the Old or the New Testament.
You just pick whatever ones you want, though. So.
Yeah, especially since I think it's in one of the epistles of Peter that he says that all the old rules still apply.
Oh, yeah.
And in one of the letters of Paul, they have Paul sending back a runaway Christian slave to his Christian owner with the request that just don't beat him too badly.
Yep.
So,
All righty.
Okay.
Well,
I'll
Charles,
let you guys go.
thank you for watching as usual and for helping us with our calendar.
Okay.
Goodbye. All righty. Well, we've got 14 billion years to cover, and it looks like we got the slide up here. So once we've got hydrogen and helium, we can make stars, and around stars, it turns out, it's very common for planets to form. And, you know, our star and planet formed about 4.5 billion years ago. But this is an ongoing thing. We can look out with our telescopes and see it happening now. And above me here is an image. This is some kind of an actual image. The central portion, so there's a jet, or what looks like a jet. What that jet is actually a dust plane. It's like the plane of the orbit of our planets. And this star has, it's Beta Pictoris, Pictoris is a constellation in the southern sky. Beta is probably the second brightest star, and it has an observed planet around it. It's one of the few planets where, by blocking the star's light with clever techniques, we can actually create an image. It's only 1 pixel, but we can create an actual image of a planet.
So what we're looking at up there is an actual, is that 1 pixel?
So the pixel is this little dot way up here.
Okay.
The star is the center portion of this blue area. The blue area is where they've canceled out the star's light.
Okay.
And then this jet coming out is like dust and cometary material, where other planets are no doubt forming.
Right.
This planet is something like, it's larger than Jupiter. I think it was something like, 6 to 10 times the size of our Jupiter. And it also happens to be kind of far away from the star. That helps be able to image it. But this is something that's ongoing right now. There's no creation where all the stars were made on the 4th day. That's nonsense. It's happening now.
So things are still being formed, is what you're saying.
Yep. The process that began with with quarks condensing into protons and neutrons condensing with electrons to form atoms and neutral atoms, and then condensing to form stars and condense to form atoms. Now, once you've got atoms and once you've got stars that fuse atoms together into heavier ones, you can begin to make the chemicals of life. And so thus, we can begin to talk about biological evolution. So let's move forward to the next slide.
So one of the first things that I remember being introduced to this evolutionary concept was biological evolution in my sophomore biology class. Mm-hmm. And so I went from physical science, which was at the parochial school, to a public school where they taught biology. And I was explaining this to you earlier, but I remember when the topic of evolution was brought up, the teacher said, now, I don't want to offend, or he did this apologetic sort of reasoning. And I'm sitting there as a Catholic at the time going, what are you talking about, dude? Like, you're the teacher. I believe whatever you say. And he's going, well, some of you aren't going to believe what this is, but because we didn't talk about biology evolution at all. Zero. I didn't even know the name. I was like, he's the teacher. He's going to be telling me the truth. Mm-hmm. It wasn't, teach the controversy. It was ignore the controversy. There is no controversy until I got to public school.
All righty. So there's this colored band above my head, and this colored band is approximately 500, this is approximately 500 billion years. This is the time during which evolution has been going on. I've lied. This is approximately 5 billion years. So most of this, up until we reach this little dividing point here, is all called Precambrian. There are little or no fossils of life, but there are some. And up above my head is something called a stromatolite. A stromatolite is like algae scum that collects dirt as well in it, and they tend to get fossilized, and they occur in places where there aren't things that eat algae. So they occur even in, that's a modern photograph. They occur in shallow water areas where it's wet long enough that the algae will grow uninterrupted, but there aren't fish or something that'll eat the algae. And there are examples of, and this structure is called a stromatolite. They often have annual banding, so you can even know something about their age, meaning how long they lived, not how old they were, or not how long ago they lived.
So those rocks up there that look like rocks, you're telling me that was pre-human life? That was 4 million years ago, or billion?
On the order of 3.5 billion years for sure. There may be some evidence almost at 3.9
And they still
billion.
exist, those
Yes.
things? Okay,
Those
so
kind
then
of structures
this begs
still
the
exist.
question, and I have to ask this question. Why are there still monkeys?
Well, that is a common issue, or objection
I'm saying that in
raised.
jest, but I mean,
Yes.
explain it. It's-
And the answer,
an explanation.
The answer, of course, is much like we say that we are related to chimps because we have a common ancestor. And at least while my parents were alive, the fact that I'm a separate individual from my sister doesn't mean that my sister can't exist or that my parents can't exist. Where you get
You have a common ancestor, your mom and dad.
well, where you get divergence into separate species usually is where you've got geographic isolation. Notice that it was geographic isolation that allows the stromatolites still to live now
Okay.
to avoid the predation of fish that chew on them. So that thing looks like a rock, but it's actually going to be kind of a muddy layer of algae, and the inner layers are going to be dead algae. But those sorts of things can get fossilized, and fossilized stromatolites are, in some applications, used as gemstones, because some of them will have beautiful banding.
Are these found at like the bottom of the ocean?
The
Like
fossils.
by heat
Oh well,
vents or
the picture above me is in shallow water. This is
Okay.
something that's like 6 inches deep, and my guess is that it's sufficiently shallow that it doesn't get fish populations growing in them to eat the algae.
Sure.
But stromatolite fossils, I have a stromatolite fossil from Minnesota, where I grew up. It's called St. Ellen's Jasper. St. Ellen's? Mary Ellen Jasper. Sorry, Mary Ellen Jasper. And it's like 3.2 billion years old. And it's a really neat thing to hold a piece of stone that has a pattern in it that was left by life that long ago. All righty, so most, though, of the history of Earth has fossils that are just simple. They're algae. But about 500 million years ago, that's where things turn blue here, a change occurs. Life starts leaving fossils that have hard parts. And so I've represented that by that's a Tyrannosaurus skull over your head. So it's only in the last 500 million years that life has been leaving fossils of complex bodies, let's say. So let's move ahead to the next slide. And now we're going to jump all the way past those dinosaurs, and this section here is 650 million years.
The whole section.
Yeah, I said 650, sorry, 65 million years.
Okay.
The edge over my head, I guess, is where the dinosaurs went extinct, and then where you are represents the most recent time where we have the complex mammals of today. So this is a vast amount of time, and I guess the point I did kind of want to cover is that most of the time that there was life on Earth, it was in a form that we wouldn't find very interesting to look at. But you could also imagine that, in a sense, it's the most representative of what life is like. What's happened in the last 500 million years is a little bit of a fluke, and perhaps it need never have happened at all. Part of why it happened may have been because the oxygen in the atmosphere finally got high enough to support a faster metabolism that could allow for active animals. It may also be that the chemistry of the ocean changed, that it became less acidic. The early ocean had a lot of dissolved iron. As oxygen was released by the algae, that combined with the iron, and it produced huge deposits of iron. Where I grew up in Minnesota, is what was once the world's largest man-made hole in the ground, the Hibbing Iron Mine. And it was a deposit that was like 70% pure iron, and it probably had its origins in biological processes, some of which may have been then later enhanced by volcanic-like activity as well. Around 1.2 billion years ago, there was rifting going on in the center of the continent, and hydrothermal activity that may have been involved in concentrating that.
So you're telling me that the theory that the dinosaurs existed and they lived for 9,000 years.
Not 9,000 years.
900.
The dinosaurs lived from approximately 250 million years ago to 65 million years ago.
200 million years ago.
So 250 minus 65. So pretend instead of 65 million years ago, so pretend it was 50 million years ago, 250 minus 50, 200 million years. 200 million years, they were the dominant large life form on the planet. Mammals have not been the dominant large life form on the planet for, only 1/4 of that amount of time.
Well, that would suggest to me that the Earth is more than 6,000 years old.
Ah, I see where you're going with that now. Yes.
I'm just saying. How could that be?
Well, I think when you put it on the scale and say 6,000, could we have had those fossils form?
Right.
No. Just doesn't seem to be the case.
One of the things I remember when I was sort of becoming an atheist, someone suggested to me this Kent Hovind video. I'm sure you know who this guy is.
I've watched a little bit of Kent Hovind. It's very difficult for me to watch.
It's hard to watch. Don't watch it. But so he does this explanation of evolution and how there's these 6 definitions of evolution and how one's real but the other 5 are nonsense, I think. And it basically comes down to the fact that he was saying microevolution, which is something that we can see like, I don't know, like our appendix shrinking or something like that.
Well, actually, we don't see things like that.
Well, I don't know. It was a very non-scientific explanation, but he said microbiology or evolution exists, but macroevolution does not exist.
And of course, he offered a firm explanation of how you could tell the difference between.
Of course not. No, of course not. Of course not. But it was basically akin to the fact that, well, we can look at a mountain and see that the wind will make the mountain recede a little bit, but it couldn't possibly eliminate that mountain and into dust. It was like, well, yeah, it could over a long enough time period. And so he was saying, well, the tiny things do exist, so evolution does exist, but not the stuff that you guys are talking about.
Well, it is a sort of a sad fact that we have this sort of marching ignorance around us now, because I think the story of evolution and that it tells us is marvelous to grasp. When I look at I live in Maryville, Tennessee. When I look just to the south of me, I see the Great Smoky Mountains. And when I look at them, I know that I'm seeing the story of geological evolution there, where the Earth's surface has changed. And those mountains are made out of material that used to be at the bottom of an ocean that was between North America and Africa and Europe before the Atlantic. That ocean closed up somewhere on the order of 300 million years ago. And then around 150 to 120 million years ago, it tore apart. It rifted apart. And the current Atlantic Ocean is young by comparison. If you sample the material on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, none of it is older than 150 million years. But the rocks that are the Great Smoky Mountains are older than that, and they are ocean bottom.
Wow.
They're called Precambrian because they're older than when fossils were readily forming. And so, so far as there exists some Precambrian rock that has fossils. Things like jellyfish exist in late Precambrian, and things like stromatolites exist even in very old Precambrian rock. But the condition to form stromatolites is a more special one. So the fossils are not widely distributed. And when I look at the mountains, I see that story as well. And it's a far more interesting story than the one with the talking snake that gives bad dietary advice.
Well, you should eat apples. Apples that's a good advice. That's solid. I mean, snake tells you to eat an apple. Eat an apple, people. It's okay.
All right. It gave bad dietary advice from the point of view of the authoritarian
He said, like,
in
eat
charge.
a Snickers, the Snickers tree of life. That'd be bad. Don't eat those.
Yeah. We could point out that the Satanic Temple makes an interesting argument that Lucifer gave the greatest gift to humanity ever given, and that was the whole earth. Because prior to that, the deity had them caged in a park.
That's true. You're right. Thanks, Satan.
Well, it's the snake. In the Old Testament, you will never find the snake identified as Satan.
Okay.
That's an innovation of Christians. To the Hebrews, he was the snake. I think if Joe Barnhart would hear, he would say that sometimes there is the enemy referred to, and in the book of Job, you have the deity conversing with someone who is something like the enemy, but they're apparently on pretty good terms because they conduct a bet.
Yeah.
It's
talking
an
about
amazing
Job?
and preposterous story. Well,
Job?
no. Lucifer, or however these names, says to God, look at Job, he's so happy, but that's because you've given him everything. And Yahweh, Jehovah says, well, I could take it away and he's a good man, he'll still love me. And Satan says, well, you want to bet? And they do it. And the deity gives Satan permission to kill Job's family. And in fact, in the Bible, that is the only killing that the devil ever does. All the other killing is the God of Abraham.
Jesus.
The God of Abraham.
Sure.
Jesus kills some fig trees.
He kills some what are the pigs?
That's true. He drives the demons out into the poor pigs and then drowns them. What an indignified way to go.
Well, we're almost out of time here. Should probably start wrapping the show up. What do you think? There's a lot more evolution we could talk about.
There was one point I wanted to make, and that is that here within the Cenozoic time, although we call it the age of mammals, birds are still numerous. They exist in more species and perhaps more individuals. And birds are dinosaurs. So in a sense, even though we call the Cenozoic the age of the dinosaurs, they're still here with us. And by certain figures of merit, they're still very successful. We are the megafauna, or we're at least part of the megafauna, and if you add in our technology, the buildings and the transportation system, we become the megafauna. And in future, paleontologists will look at these layers and say, this is the age of industrialization. All righty. Well, I think we do need to finish up here. We don't have time for the break portion. We need to go right into the closing.
All right, so get out your pen and paper. This has been Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalist of East Tennessee. I'm no longer Catholic Dan.
And I'm Faithless Forrest. Please send us feedback. Leave us voicemail at 865-272-9060 or email freethoughtforum@yahoo.com.
You can see this show on Tuesdays from 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern Time on this station, Knoxville Station, at 2200 Greenwich Mean Time at ctvknox.org.
The opinions expressed on this show are of the hosts and or guests, if we have any, and not any official opinion of ASK or RET. We'd like to thank Sam for technical support, the staff at CTB Knox, and all of our callers.
And nuns, those who identify with no religion, are the fastest growing religious group in America, right here in East Tennessee, the Atheist Society of Knoxville Rationalists. You're